it with courage. We said in 2017, when Donald Trump was first elected on watch night, we said bowing down would not be an option. And rather than crying and moaning, we went to work to build a Poor People's Campaign, not just for this election, but because we knew that we needed to build a campaign. We found out we had 140 million other people that needed the campaign, 43% of this nation. We found out that 4 million people get up every morning, can buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water. We found out that racism, as it affects Black people, brown people, Asian people, indigenous people, all needed to be connected together. We found out that we were spending $800 billion a year on the war economy. And if we just cut that in half, we would still have more money than North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, and Iraq. So we went to work. And so here we are in November of 2020. And I want to, like Frederick Douglass, meet this moment with a cheerful spirit and say that what we are seeing happening right now, even as the returns are yet to fully come in, is the beginning of the end of an illusion. You know, since Donald Trump eked out an electoral college vote in 2016, he has proudly, every time he could, displayed a US map that highlights in red the counties he won, despite losing the national popular vote to Hillary Clinton by more than 3 million votes. Oh, he has been as pompous as Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible. And the point of the map, like a financial statement, he used it for years to apply for credit, to claim legitimacy, to declare he had a mandate to do the extreme things he and his marauding band of politicians and enablers. This was a president who had never had the support of the majority of the Americans. He pretended, created an illusion to represent most of the country, even though he was only in the White House by 80,000 votes from an area where 2.6 million poor and low wealth people had not even voted. The red mirage, though, was not something created by Trump. It has always been an illusion. And an illusion can be that for years now could have been broken if we dared to organize fusion coalitions among poor and low wealth people. And that is our work. In Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, Republican legislatures fought hard to help Trump maintain this appearance of legitimacy on election night. They did it by delaying the counting of overwhelmingly Democratic mail-in ballots. They tried. But elections are not decided by candidates or state legislators. In a democracy, elections are decided by the people. Donald Trump did not create, though, this myth of the red electoral map. He simply exploited it. The map was created, the idea was created in 1968, some 52 years ago, when Republican strategists went in to Richard Nixon and declared that the way to win would be to create something called positive polarization, to pit some Americans against their neighbors in so-called battleground states, to deliberately split the country for political gain, especially from Maryland to Nevada, the South, and the so-called Sun Belt. All Trump did was exploit this. All McConnell has done for years have exploited it. Trump's extremism has revealed a larger and more diverse electorate, though, that has the power to reshape priorities in American public life. And this is not so much due to Democrats, because Democrats have sometimes given in to the exploitation. They've accepted the illusion and they've created so-called blue walls. But this movement, we said it's not a blue wall or a red wall, it's fusion coalitions. It's lifting up poor and low wealth people around an agenda and in a movement who choose to not only vote, but then once they vote, to challenge those in power. So now where are we? More than 72 million Americans have voted this year to repudiate extremism, racism, Trumpism, Trumpism that comes out of extremism, and fusion coalitions from Wisconsin to Pennsylvania to Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia have demonstrated their power by making races too close to call, even in Arizona and Nevada. These are places where some of them, where just a few years ago, the call would have been easy. We are seeing the beginnings of the complete falling of the Southern strategy. And guess what, Poor People's Campaign? You are right in the middle of it and a major cause of it. Because what we understand now is that from living wages to healthcare to immigration to climate crisis and to really dealing with the issues of racism, voter suppression, police brutality, mass incarceration, these pressing issues we face are not red or blue issues, but they're moral issues, and they're all connected, and they compel us to face who we are as a nation and who we want to be as a nation. And this election has revealed that while the forces of extremist division are strong, because there's always going to be some division between justice and injustice, the first goal of our Constitution is not even unity, it's the establishment of justice, for providing for the common defense, ensuring and promoting the general welfare. And then if you do those things, you can ensure domestic tranquility. But domestic tranquility is not first, justice is first. But the forces of extremism have had this illusion, but fusion coalitions are showing the possibility of a genuine democracy is stronger still. And our task now is to build together an America that works for all of us. So many people are talking about the nation being divided, and it is. When hasn't it been? But it's not evenly divided. That's the point. Extremism has exploited our deep wounds, but it's not evenly divided. That's why even the Constitution, even the flawed electoral college doesn't say you have to get all the electoral college votes. It says 270, which means there's going to be division. But we know that we don't have to exploit the division. We can build fusion coalitions, which is the only way to really heal the nation is to address poverty and systemic racism. If we address poverty, systemic racism, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative, religious nationalism, then that is the key to the healing of the nation. And it will not bring everybody along, but it will bring so many along that they become a force for moving us forward than a force for moving us backwards. And the coronavirus pandemic, as we pray for all those who are suffering, it has not impacted the Americans equally. According to an analysis by the Center for Disease Control, poor people are 3 times as likely to contract COVID-19. Not poor Black people, white people, just poor people. Of course, poor Black people in percentage are more likely, and Latino and Indigenous, but poor people are 3 times more likely to contract. And when they do, and their families are not able to quarantine and skip work. Poverty has not only made the pandemic worse, racism has made it worse, but poverty has fueled our public health crisis, as many service workers have continued to show up for work, even when they suspect they may be infected with the virus because they have no other way to survive. This is the division we ought to be talking about. Not the division between McConnell and Schumer, not the cute division that people want to talk about, can't everybody just get along? No, when injustice is alive. As one of the great writers in our society, James Baldwin taught us, we can have disagreement until your disagreement suggests my right to exist. We can even have unity unless your unity makes me have to agree. In order to be unified with you, I have to agree that I don't have the right to exist. False unity can never be a cop-out for justice. And addressing poverty and systemic racism is the way to bring domestic tranquility. We have to challenge those forces that would rather not deal with that. We cannot agree with them and unify with them if the price of their unity is not addressing the issue of poverty. In the face of this painful reality, when the poor are being affected more during this pandemic, something's happening. Americans increasingly are supporting policies that address poverty because so many are falling into poverty. Support has increased even among Republicans who have historically been less supportive. Take living wages, for example. 7 in 10 Americans support raising the minimum wage now, according to a recent Ipsos poll. Before the pandemic, only 48% of Republicans backed this anti-poverty measure. But in late August, 62% of Republicans said they support raising the minimum wage. So the key to unifying is not just holding hands, not just agreeing to the extremism, but addressing poverty and addressing systemic racism. Universal access to healthcare is another anti-poverty measure that a growing majority of Americans support. Despite the Trump administration's attack on the Affordable Care Act, its expansion of healthcare to 25 million Americans continues to remain popular. Ahead of this year's election, 63% of Americans said the government has a responsibility to make sure everybody has healthcare. So there's even support for universal healthcare. That's a 4% increase since last year. So at the very time extremists are trying to give us the illusion that people don't want health care, the people are in a very different place. And that's going to be the key for anybody in leadership. It's not to kowtow to the extremists to try to unify with them, but to unite with the people, particularly poor and low-wealth people, and make this democracy work for everybody, because that's the real division we should address. When asked if the government has a responsibility to provide health care for the poor and elderly, even a majority of Republicans agree. That's why our work now is more important than ever, because we are right. Fusion moral coalitions that lift and deal with issues affecting the poor, the 5 core issues we have lifted up are the key to the healing of this nation. They have even been the key to many people turning out to vote. No doubt this election has highlighted deep divisions in our common life, many of those that have been regularly exploited by the wealthy few. But this is not new. It's not new. This business of let's get back to place of pristine unity, win-win. This is not new. The long story of inequality in America is that race, politics, and cultural wedge issues have been deployed consistently to divide and conquer coalitions of Native, Black, white, brown, and Asian Americans who have pushed this nation to guarantee equal treatment under the law and an economy that works for everyone. And those wounds don't go away when we commit to tackle poverty, but there is the promise that they can heal when we recognize that some things are not about left versus right, but about right versus wrong. And it is wrong that nearly half the citizens in the richest nation of the world continue to struggle with the ends meet, 140 million and growing. And addressing that is the key to healing America and finishing the illusion of division and polarization. Ending poverty is the moral issue that can and must unite us all. I mean, think about it. Here we are today, and a candidate, a white older man and a Black woman with roots in India have gotten 72+ million votes, more than any time in history. Think about that. In the middle of a pandemic, and they didn't fully embrace the poor people's agenda. That's for us to make. But both of them were at our Congress in 2019 when we lifted up a moral budget and committed to address poverty. They were at our recent gathering, September 14th. The Vice President was and declared that ending poverty was central to his understanding and philosophy of change. And they've dared to run on 15 and a union, expanding healthcare and talking about systemic racism. And they got 72 million votes so far, more than any team in history. What if, when they govern, they truly decide to address poverty in the moral jubilee budget and to tap into the 62 million, 64 million poor and low wealth people that are eligible to vote and address the 140 million that were in poverty before the pandemic? My God, if you can get this many votes just doing 15 in the union, healthcare, and talking about systemic racism, and they would not be there if it was not for movements and the Poor People's Campaign, the Fight 15. No. Be clear about this. And what did we do in this election? We didn't just sit back. We contacted 2 million, 2.3 million. Liz will talk about it more, 2.3 million. We did that. And over 400,000, 20% voted early. And in the states that right now, that's too close to call, we touched 1.5 million poor and low wealth people and said, join the movement and vote. We didn't even invite them to vote for candidates. We invited them to vote for a movement and to look at the candidate through the lens of the movement and vote and look at what we're seeing in Philadelphia, Michigan, and Wisconsin, in Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, and North Carolina, all places where we, the Poor People's Campaign, went to work. And we did this. We didn't even have our mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington yet. It's going to happen. Thousands of people in the street around these issues, yes. We've not even yet pushed our Jubilee Justice agenda in state houses and the United States Congress. That's to come. And already we are showing the nation the way. You want to be healed? You got to address poverty, systemic poverty, racism, ecological devastation, the war economy. Now, some are saying, well, because the Senate may have stayed the same, and some are saying the politicians aren't going to do this. Let me tell you, don't forget, we're in the midst of a pandemic. People are hurting. We might not hear it right now because of the election, but people are dying, still dying, 1,000 a day, dying, 100,000 getting infected. And the people are not going to stand for that. They're not going to stand for a new administration. I don't care what their party is, not addressing these issues. So the politicians don't get to act on us because we're not going to merely be spectators. We are participants. So all the talking heads are saying, oh, it's going to be this and they're going to do this. They're looking backwards. They're not looking forward. They're not looking at what the movement is going to do. People took time to vote. Now that they voted, when this comes in, people are going to be engaged because we're not going to let Congress people sit up in the United States Congress with health care and protection and living wages and people not have the same thing. Don't you forget, my brothers and sisters, that we are called to be a movement. Not just to be in an election, but to be a movement. But because you moved in this election, you are seeing in front of you the ending of the illusion, the beginnings of it, the very beginnings of a third Reconstruction. And that's your work. Now we got to stay at it. We got to keep building fusing coalitions, Even the closeness of the races in the South, if they don't turn out exactly like some would like, the closeness is a sign of the ending of the illusion. That's why we got to keep organizing, keep moving, keep fighting. And remember, we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation of the soul. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So my brothers and sisters in the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and to all of you across the nation who are listening, we know the answer to the healing. Address poverty, address systemic racism, address ecological devastation, the war economy. And we may not end all of the divisions, but healing can come in this nation. Because if justice comes, healing is present. If promoting the general welfare comes, healing is present. If caring for the least of these, healing is present. And all may not come, but those who come and those who are healed will be far more than enough to keep pushing this nation in the right paths of justice and righteousness and love and truth. God bless you. Please listen to Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis and what she has to say to the nation today as we speak today. And never forget, forward, together, and not one step back. God bless you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this movement. And thank you for joining this movement right now, if you're new. As we heard from Reverend Barber, we know that the fight continues. We know that we have to fight for the heart and soul of our democracy. We have no intention of standing down, no matter who is in every line of office come January. Indeed, it's our responsibility to mobilize and organize, register and educate people for a movement, a massive fusion movement that can unite and excite people to win healthcare and living wages and equitable education, to turn our war economy into a peace economy. As Reverend Barber opened, we come to you before today, we come before you today, knowing that 250,000 people die every year because of poverty. People of all races and creeds and colors. And then now we have nearly 250,000 people who have died from a pandemic, disproportionately poor people and people of color, the vast majority who didn't have to die, but died because of ineptitude and negligence of the administration. In a nation that boasts of being the wealthiest country in the world, we have more than half of children living in food insecure homes. And this pandemic has made this hunger, this poverty, job loss, eviction, the suffering of children even worse. We know in Lowndes County, Alabama, families have raw sewage in their yards and mold in their homes. We know in Oak Flats, Arizona, native grave sites have been desecrated and indigenous families are being pushed out. We know in Grays Harbor, Washington, homeless encampments of millennials are being attacked by police, by militia groups. And we know that in states all over the country, people are burying their loved ones because of a lack of health care. We have an ongoing pandemic, an ongoing economic crisis in the midst of this political crisis that we're in right now. And that the only response to all of this is to build the power of 140 million poor and low income people. We also know that we're having an impact. What the Poor People's Campaign pulled off in the past weeks, in the past months, years, is absolutely tremendous. We reached out to and connected with 2.3 million poor and low income people in states all across the country. We know that hundreds and hundreds of thousands of those people, perhaps even more, participated in this election when many of them have not voted for maybe 12 years. We know that this happened in key states where their uptake in voting matters and has helped determine election outcomes already that we've seen over the past couple of days. We had poll monitors at hundreds of polling places, including places that have not seen poll monitors in decades. As Reverend Barber mentioned, we raised the issues of systemic racism and poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and the war economy, and the false moral narrative of Christian nationalism. In our national narrative, we compelled candidates to start taking up these injustices. And where candidates did, people responded. The exit polls on what voters want show that when the needs and demands of 140 million poor and low-income people are put on the agenda, the people respond. In Florida, raising the minimum wage and voting for low-wage workers to get a union got more votes than either Biden or Trump. And Biden and Harris got more votes than any presidential candidate in history. This from a candidate who ran on $15 and a union expanding healthcare, saying, in fact, and we will hold folks to it, that ending poverty is a theory of change. Can we even imagine how many votes such candidates could get if the full, bold, visionary demands of our moral platform to heal and transform the nation, our Jubilee policy platform, were being raised? When we frame, when we fight for these issues, we can break through. This is what we have been saying, and this is what we showed even in this election. In Michigan, where my mom is from, that was hit first and worst by deindustrialization, a failing water infrastructure, and many other crises. And Wisconsin, my home state, a state where unions have been under attack for years, where austerity has become the norm for budgets and social welfare policy. We saw that poor and low income people directly impacted by racism and poverty, were able to turn out in large numbers and vote for life rather than death. We know that folks want health care, want the decriminalization of our communities, want social programs that lift from the bottom. We know that we need to ensure that when a vaccine is finally developed for the coronavirus, it's free and accessible to everyone. We need to curb this pandemic, and we need to pass a just stimulus. And we, in the Poor People's Campaign in our 45 states across the country, will stay focused on these issues and injustices until we have all that everybody needs to thrive and not just barely survive. The Poor People's Campaign has been sounding the alarm on voter suppression from way before this election. And to understand this election, we must continue to raise the alarm about voter suppression and an impoverished democracy. As we need to recognize this was the second presidential election without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act. In states across the country, we saw closed polling places, voter intimidation, lack of accessibility, poll taxes, disenfranchisement of those with criminal justice records. Despite that, people stood in long lines, fought hard and strong to defend the Postal Service, were determined to make their voice heard, made their own signs to ensure that voters knew where to go, provided snacks and sustenance, and made sure that every vote counts. And Reverend Barber has suggested, and this is the truth, that Trump's failure to address the pandemic, to become a super spreader himself, spreading death and illness, especially once he learned that this virus has become disproportionately impacting poor and Black and Latino and Native people, is yet another form of voter suppression. Candidates not loudly or boldly calling for the needs and demands of the 140 million poor and low income, the 64 million low income eligible voters, not hearing their name, not hearing their condition, is a form of voter suppression. But we know that in American history, whenever we've faced the forces of regression, movements have arisen to call us to higher ground. That's what abolitionists did in the 19th century. It's what women suffragists did in the early 20th century. It's what we have to continue to do, to sound the alarm and to organize, organize, organize. And so we know we will keep organizing. We will continue to go to communities that have been forgotten. We will continue to unite people that those in power want to keep divided. We will do this because we have to, and because we've seen it can be done. Fusion movement is the hope of this society. It connects with the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. On the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will just be an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho role must be transformed so that men and women will not constantly be beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. Poverty is not inevitable. Racism doesn't have to be the last word. It's systemic sin. And we all have the responsibility to partner to build a movement to confront racism and poverty, ecological devastation in this war economy, once and for all. We are continuing to organize. The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, will be organizing caravans on Monday, November 16th, where we continue to push for a just stimulus package, where we continue to push that our democracy matters and that we, the people, have the power to organize, to provide justice for all, to establish that all needs are met. Democracy means that every human being matters and that everybody must be in. Nobody is out. We thank you for all the work you're doing. We ask you to join in this powerful fusion movement that can indeed heal and transform this nation. Because we know when we lift, when we organize, when we build power from the bottom, everybody can rise. And so we will do so. We will rise in these caravans on Monday, November 16th. We will keep on rising and mobilizing and organizing, and we will move forward together, not one step back. Thank you very much.